This evening, I would like to say a few things about Gandharan art. Gandharan art is a vast subject, and in fact it's very difficult to say definitive things, particularly with dates, about Gandharan art. Part of this is because Gandhāra is a very mixed situation in that a number of cultures came into this region and influenced it. The first major culture that influenced Gandhāra is, of course, the Greeks, with Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC. At this time, Alexander wanted to push down into southern India, but was stopped. So the majority of the Greeks going east settled in Gandhāra. Gandhāra was a lush area, agriculturally very important, and on the basis of trade, also very important. At this time, the Greeks and the Western Empire would have traded many things south to India. They might not have used the sea route, but they would have used the overland route. Later, by the 3rd, 4th century AD, this route could be called the Silk Road because silk was traded by the Chinese west and other things such as glass from Roman Syria was traded to China. China had a very large impact on the region because they traded porcelains, lacquers, things like this that influenced the art. So when looking at Gandharan art, the first thing we might see is something that would have a Greek influence, like this figure of the Buddha. The Greek influence might be a little bit difficult to see now because this is a very common figure of the Buddha, as would be found in China or even as far east as Japan. But here, the Buddha has clothing that has folds and wrinkles that suggests Greek art. Another typical example of Greek art is the hairstyle. Perhaps not so much the bun at the top, but the curly hair is very at home within the Greek sphere. Of course, other examples that are clear on this are the Buddha's long ears, large ears. This is a feature of the Buddha, particularly as is known from literature, not so much a figure of Greek sculpture. This was made not of stone, but of stucco, and it was pressed into a mold and then affixed to what was likely a coffin. A little bit earlier in time, Gandharan art was known for carving things like this, which is made of schist, a stone. So artistically, this is a very different process than this figure of the Buddha. This figure of the Buddha would be pressed into a mold. The mold would be carved in reverse. This figure would be made by traditional stone carving methods, which would remove material you don't want. Typically, the backs of these show very rough ways of finishing the stone, whereas the front are fairly polished. However, if you look at these two figures, the stucco is very much more detailed than the stone. But this was not likely the case in antiquity. In antiquity, the stone would have been prepared with also a layer of stucco as well as paint. This would have given it very much more detail, and it would have made it more lively and lifelike. Many people suggest that Greek sculpture would have been very wildly painted, and this would have lessened the impact perhaps to a modern person who is used to things from classical antiquity being white marble, whereas the people of antiquity would have been used to things that were very brightly painted, even things made of marble. If this statue were painted, of course it would be very difficult, if not impossible, without touching it, to know that it was made of stucco and not stone. There are a variety of other materials that were commonly used by the Greeks, including clay. Clay is very easy to make, but it doesn't survive as well as stone. As you can see, this figure has been broken. It was a very long panel that was attached using these two holes. It's unclear exactly what this would be attached to. Would it be a figurine or panel that would be used in a home, or would it be used in a funerary context? It's unclear. Also significant is the figure looks very different from the Greek style figure that we have here, suggesting that it is of a later date, perhaps less reflecting the Greek culture and more reflecting the Kushan culture that was coming from Central Asia. The Kushans were likely an Indo-European people who came down, conquering the Greeks, and very soon adopting Buddhism. But their understanding of Buddhism and their artistic canons were very different from the Greeks. It's possible that this young man is a representation of the young Buddha. We can see that he's wearing a tunic, he has his hands at his waist, and he has a very distinctive headgear that covers what looks like his voluminous hair, very different from the top notch of the Greek style figurine. Also, there's this bird, a crane, that's standing behind him. It's interesting to speculate if this is just decorative or if this has some religious significance. A crane is a bird that hunts with stealth. It remains absolutely quiet for long periods of time, and then suddenly darts out and catches prey by spearing it with its sharp beak. Could this perhaps be a reference to meditation? And if it was, it would be very much at home in the Buddhist world. As with so many other aspects of Gandharan art, it is difficult to determine exactly what they mean. There are texts from this period, but matching the texts with the material culture is perhaps more of an art than it is a science. A good example is this small figure that likely was attached to a coffin. It's of stone, it's of steatite, and it appears to show a wrestler who is about to encounter his opponent. The wrestler is on all fours and is very well fed, seemingly using his mass to overcome his opponent. This style of wrestling is known today as sumo wrestling, but of course many cultures, no doubt, had similar athletic contests. There are many other aspects of Gandharan art to be explored, particularly how Gandharan art influenced the art of surrounding cultures. But sadly, we don't have enough time for that now. Thank you very much.